this thing on? Because it's getting ready to be on.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to Bell Ringer. My name is Greg Pokricki. Your guest name today is Jack Greco, Executive Director of Techstars. We talk about baseball video games. We talk about middle school dances, but most importantly, probably why you're here, is to hear about Techstars and what's happening in the entrepreneurial ecosystem in Buffalo, how it's advancing, and what role Techstars is playing in that. Thank you guys so much for listening. Really appreciate your time. Great episode, and join one of the events that Jack talks about, and we're going to put some in the link. Thanks, guys. Bye. I want to familiarize the audience with you a little bit. What's your professional background and kind of how you got into this role?
Sure. So I am 35. I am originally from Canandaigua. I'm going to give you the whole story, so
yeah,
ready for
start to finish.
Yeah. Originally from Canandaigua. My father was an entrepreneur. He was an antique dealer. My mother was a loving, stay-at-home mom. And kind of everything that's happened in my career has been, I can attribute to kind of one of the two of them and something I picked up from them. I went to school and spent about a dozen years of my life right after high school in Rochester. So 2 degrees from U of R. They were pretty good at taking money from me, I guess is the way to put it. When I was in grad school, I learned what venture capital was. You know, I'd been around an entrepreneur my whole life. I wanted to be able to do something impactful kind of in my home. And my home is really upstate New York, right? And when I learned what venture capital was, I thought, I want to do it and I want to do it here. I couldn't tell you how many people told me, and this is back in 2008, that just didn't happen. There was hardly any of it. And they were pretty right. They were pretty correct. But I ended up basically working my way into a position with a local VC called the Trillium Group. So they work with a lot of high-tech spin-outs from local universities. So I did that for about 5 years and learned what it was like to jump into all these different businesses that I didn't know anything about, and I didn't have any reason to be in them outside of that we were looking at them as potential investments. Kind of at that same time, like it always happens, it always has to do with a woman. In this case, it was my grandmother, lived out in Depew. And this whole time we had thought about doing a new fund. And, my grandfather passed away in 1999, and I knew my grandmother was out here. I knew that I had a soft spot for being taken care of. It's probably the Italian in me.
Right.
And I knew that she was out here by herself. And I knew that Buffalo was kind of in the range of what we were looking at, and that when we were talking about a new fund, we were talking about from Buffalo to Syracuse. So I said, well, look, I'll cover Buffalo, right? And that started a long string of kind of the second relationship I had with my grandmother as an adult, as opposed to, a kid she was chasing around with a wooden spoon. And it also kind of opened up what Buffalo really was to me, because I always just knew it as kind of Depew and Lancaster, which are great places, but isn't obviously a full embodiment of the city.
Right.
So as I was working at Trillium, I was coming out here, and there were some individuals, Marnie Levine being one of them, Zach Snyder over at Agency 15, a couple of kind of the people that were trying to turn over and create this understanding locally of what like a startup was and what real, the difference between innovation, invention, and entrepreneurism, and trying to get them all to work together. And they were really some of the seminal players on that. So, by day I was doing a lot of work with Trillium, and then getting to know kind of what was going on in Buffalo, I started to kind of grow a little bit of love for the city, right? My mom grew up here, so it was always in my heart. So I'd been coming up here since a kid. So did that for a while, and then, ACV is I think, a reasonably well-documented journey. But, I have kind of intentionally always stayed a little bit more in the shadows. And, it was just because there's been so much stuff to actually do. Like I told you beforehand, this is my first podcast. When I listen to this, it will probably be the second podcast I ever listened to. Mm-hmm. Outside of the one I listened to that you did with Royce Woods before this, to know what I was getting into, right?
Well,
so
I'm glad to be your first experience in the podcast world. Setting your expectations nice and low.
No. I mean, it's been great. I mean, we're 3 minutes into it, right? And you let me talk. So, So since then, I ended up, I made the decision to walk away from ACV last summer, so it's coming up on about a year ago. And by no means was any insult to the company. It was just, I was thinking, okay, I'm ready for the next thing, right? Like, I like the really challenging part, the kind of the high risk, high reward aspect of the business. And so I was thinking about what I was doing. I was helping some local companies. And then there was this chatter in the background from Chris Hively at Techstars. You know, I understand now Chris's long game in ultimately trying to get me to do this, because they were parallel incentives, right? I mean, they kind of, the way I felt, my heartstrings ran completely in line with some of the things they were pushing. So I took the leap. I tell people I'm a horrible employee. Chris can probably comment if that's the case for Techstars or not. But I took the leap, and I'm leading this ecosystem development opportunity in Buffalo, and I couldn't be happier.
Yeah. So one thing I want to talk about is Techstars globally, I think, is known more as an accelerator.
Yep.
Or at least that's the first thing that comes into most people's minds that know about it. That is significantly different than what you guys are doing here with that ecosystem development. So can you talk a little bit about the contrast?
Sure, absolutely. Buffalo's not ready for an accelerator, right? And that's my opinion. I think other people will share that. Some may not. You need to have companies you need to have a lot of companies, right? Like, it's not like, oh, geez, 10 run through an accelerator. I think we can find 10. Let's do this. I mean, I'm guessing Buffalo's probably got somewhere between 200 and 250 startups where at least one individual has committed to setting up and organizing a company, making some type of financial and considerable time commitment, and is kind of pledging their efforts in that avenue. The place where these accelerators have kind of worked, you're looking at 3 to 4 times that number of startups, in the greater area. So what is this, right? We'll tell you, and like the link of which you could probably click onto this thing or attach to this thing is the readout from Techstars' initial assessment of Buffalo. And they break it down to 5 categories, right? They break it down to culture, they break it down to talent, they break it down to capital, feeders or institutions, and then density. And so I think before any decision on what was the best next step for the greater Buffalo area, this assessment was kind of done and looked at. And what we realize is there's some areas that we need to focus on, right? Some of them there's not a ton that Techstars can do, right? Just to be clear, Techstars is performing a 3-year contract. This is what they got right now. 3-year contract to help build out the entrepreneurial, the startup ecosystem in at least the greater Buffalo area. I like to think of it as Western New York, right? Upstate New York, whatever. Concentric rings, it all matters, right? All
around
matters.
Here, yeah.
Right, yeah. I didn't have to climb a concrete wall to get from here to Rochester the other day. So some of the places like density we can't do, right? Like, we're not going to buy a building, a 150,000 square foot building and say this is where all the startups can go, right? We want to encourage that activity. We want to encourage density. Yeah, it all comes down to physics, right? Like, interactions happen when molecules collide. That's, I guess it's chemistry. I guess it's both, right? So what do? You get them in a tighter space, more collisions happen. You create these platforms and these opportunities for more speed, like more opportunities for interactions, and some of those interactions bind. I mean, everything I'm explaining is really complex, right? It's not, you would never try to prognosticate, or understand how individual molecules move, or molecules move. But, sometimes, now I'm going to spill into culture. Culturally, we try to do that. Culturally, we try to say, okay, we're going to force these, these individual resources or these potential entrepreneurs to like focus in this kind of area. And we're going to use our dollar, we're going to use our persuasion to do that. I'm not saying Buffalo is any better or any worse at doing some of those things, but it's present. And so think of this kind of like breaking down silos to get more mixing and more interactions to happen, right? Like, right. So that the School of Medicine mixes with what's going on the east side of Buffalo, right? Like, right. Niagara Falls and the gaming community in Buffalo have some type of interaction. Like, So
yeah, so you talked a little bit about, Buffalo might not be ready for an accelerator.
correct.
And Techstars undertook this assessment, a big assessment of the startup ecosystem here. What makes, why Buffalo for Techstars here? What are the positives that our region possesses currently that make, a system like this a worthwhile venture?
Sure. This could be a combination between what Dave told me and what I know. Okay. What I know is the local pride and passion here. I mean, you hear about it, right? Is just really high. I went from somebody that casually followed the Bills, up until my late teenage years, to like a rabid fan that probably rips their shirt off at games, right? There's a contagious aspect to it.
Yeah.
So you have that. You have people wanting to build a culture, but people want to do this here. Like, I think that, look, 43 North, who we are the vendor of to them technically, has been a great partner. There are some resources that are spun up in the area. Some of the work Marnie's done with Launch New York is awesome. So why they will say why Buffalo, Buffalo was willing to support this endeavor. I mean, Techstars is getting paid. This is not a charity. Though I did tell them once I had to swallow my words that I would do this for free. But I think more so it's that it's got some of the raw ingredients, and they just kind of need to be brought together in a different way.
Yeah. I know a lot of Techstars' mission is to get people off of the sidelines and say that everyone has a role to play in the entrepreneurial ecosystem. Really, even if you think that you don't, there is something that you can do. So how are you getting people off the sidelines?
Sure. So we are focusing our efforts. So I will say there are two things we're doing, right? Creating open, inclusive environments where random interactions can happen, right? So we resurrected Buffalo Open Coffee Club. First meeting was last Tuesday, like a couple days ago. I think we had like 45 or 50 people there. I sent the email out like Sunday night. I could not be happier there were that many people that showed. You start to create events like this that are just mingling events where these passionate people, these people with love, want to show up and they want to interact and collide with people of different ways, shapes, and forms, right? Different walks of life. Because they all got one thing in common. They all are interested and they're motivated, and they got a motor that they can run. We are going to do some more classic programming, right? Like, we will be standing up startup weekends. There's going to be a startup week September 16th through the 20th. A couple weeks ago, we did an open town hall forum where we kind of talked a little bit about the assessment, but a lot about why the city matters to us. We are trying to crowdsource what people want and be that lightning rod to generate the kind of speakers and content people want to come here to educate, So when you think about all these different pieces, it's open programming, and then it's also, but these aren't things we want to own. Like Techstars has a 3-year contract. It's like when you shake the aerosol can, it's only got so much propellant in it. So what can we get done with, the programming that's around here, the resources? How do we make the current Angel Group stronger? How do we help put more light on what Marnie's trying to do on Launch New York? How do we tell people there's things going on Niagara Falls and Cattaraugus and Batavia? And how do we let people know it's okay to drive 60 minutes to Rochester to make a pitch and start getting the reciprocal happening also? It's almost like we need to be a thread that laces everything together. And then as a community, we need to give that thread a couple hard tugs to pull everything a little closer.
Yeah, and you want to create something that can sustain itself long after that 3-year contract, right?
Yeah. It's like when you get a power-up in a video game, right? You're not going to have it forever. So go as far as you can with it and be thoughtful and mindful with the fact that everything's got a timer, right? I mean, we're all human. We're all mortal. I mean, but the community's development is going to come from 1,000 small, almost invisible movements.
Yeah.
But like it's in those interactions and the communications, right? Like we have a full-time author in resident that we brought on this summer. He's actually an expat. he'd be considered an expat, Andy Gordon, so shout out to him. He's working on a book right now talking about how kind of these Rust Belt type cities are engaging in performing in this kind of more 21st century entrepreneurial culture.
Well,
So
that's a little bit like when Rise of the Rest came through
Yes.
with Steve Case. And
Yep. And here he is. He's basically, I'm going to use the word give. I don't know if it was actually giving, but giving to a community he probably had never really stepped foot in, right? It's, can we get enough of those, right? Like, that's a nudge up against this big, muddy, sloppy ball that we're trying to get to start rolling. How many other nudges can we make, and can we build momentum to get that thing turning?
well, I think your power-up analogy with the video game is perfect.
Yeah.
And we just have to find the power-up once we have bases loaded and a guy coming to the plate so you can hit a grand slam.
Yeah, it's
I'm a big baseball fan, so I play baseball video games.
No, that's, first thing we do is, so if I'm going to use a baseball analogy, I would say we are above the Mendoza line, but we can get our average up a good amount.
Right.
So for the baseball geeks out there, they'll know what that means.
We always say, you don't always go for the home run. You got to hit singles and doubles, small and medium-sized companies.
Yeah, well, which is funny because I'm sitting here representing probably the biggest home run swing that, I will, at most a third of the creation of it, right?
Mm-hmm.
Of something like that. But yeah, it's a culmination. It's a cultural thing, right? It's funny. Like when I hear people talk, the one thing I'm surprised, and I think it is truly one of our biggest advantages is love. People passionately care about this area. And I'm not just talking about a Bills game on Sunday when guys are going crazy, though it is 10 times what you see anywhere else. I'm talking about the fire in people's bellies, and we just need to figure out how to get all these different things kind of moving really in harmony. Harmony is the other word, because really, like, we're trying to do this. It's like that middle school dance when everybody's dancing for the first time, and it looks totally different, in the mirror in your house than it does when you're doing it with a girl, right? And so we're getting there, right? We're maturing.
So this is a pretty new initiative. You guys are just getting into this 3-year block. What are you most encouraged by in Buffalo? And maybe it is ACV, a company that has taken off. Maybe it's something different. But is there something you look at that you say, there's a lot of hope here, a lot of potential here?
The people, hands down. I don't think it matters what company they're in or who they have to pledge their allegiance to on a daily basis. When I sit out there and I'm personally asked, like, can you do me a favor? I'm hardly ever met with a no. And even more surprising than that, because it's easy to glad hand somebody, when somebody says yeah, they don't just do that favor. Like, they take it another step. They take it another notch. Now, there's a lot of good people everywhere in the world, right? And I'm not saying we're anything special. But I think putting our focus on the individuals, on, like, ACV's got a ton of people. Like, ACV is a good organization because it's got great people. We're not doing anything revolutionary there, right? And I think that's probably true for almost any company, from the ones that are trying to cure cancer. Somebody that cared and gave a hoot is the one that ended up, individually or in conjunction with other people solving that, all the way to a service-based business like ACV.
Right.
It was one of my hardest parts of leaving. I felt like I was, like, moving away from my family, right? And I'm always around the area, so I don't have an office intentionally. I don't hang my shingle anywhere. But when I run into people, it's like, I'm greeted with hugs and sometimes kisses, right? And like, that's what I love. Like, that's why I do this. Right. And I think that's why a lot of people do what they do.
Great. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Absolutely.
And thank you for the role that you play in the startup ecosystem. Before I let you go, we have a few Blizzard round questions.
Sure.
Hard-hitting, journalistic questions. Number one, if you were a flavor of ice cream, what would you be?
Pistachio.
Book or TV show that you'd recommend?
The Enneagram.
Okay. Text or phone call?
I like to talk to people in person.
Bills or Sabres?
Bills.
Hiking or skiing?
Skiing. Well, that's tough, but skiing.
Okay. Last question. Chicken wings, drumstick or flat?
Oh my God. If they're hot, I would take either, but I'm a drumstick guy.
Okay, me too.
Cool.
Thanks for your time.
Absolutely. Thank you.
Bell Ringer is a podcast by Invest Buffalo Niagara, the region's privately funded, nonprofit marketing and economic development organization. Please rate this podcast, follow our social media channels, and read our blog at buffaloniagara.org for the best of Buffalo Niagara. Come grow your business with us.